some Republicans actually don't like this bill.
Mhm.
They can pretty much do whatever they want.
What's going on with this bill now, though, is that it's trying to offer immediate or like semi-immediate relief.
It's not something that's enjoyable.
It seems like we've gone to an awful lot of effort and work to not achieve very much.
Welcome to Our National Conversation, a podcast in which we discuss politics from all angles. We are completely nonpartisan, and all views, respectfully stated, are welcome here. Our podcast is unique in that it is hosted and run by students who are focused on finding solutions to the biggest problems facing America.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Our National Conversation. The date today is June 29th, and we are going to be discussing the big, beautiful bill and different perspectives on it, trying to figure out what the heck is going on with this bill, what's actually in it, what are different people saying about it. My name is Sam Taylor. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Our National Conversation. I'm going to be joined today by Jeff and Masie, CEO and Managing Editor at Our National Conversation, respectively. And we're just going to be kind of comparing notes on this subject. We don't really have anyone in the room today who's super progressive, anyone in the room today who's super conservative. It's going to kind of be three moderates trying to figure out what the heck's going on here. So thank you both for meeting with me today. And actually, before we start, I'm going to ask an entirely unrelated question. Is my camera angle fine?
Yeah, you look good.
Okay, the only reason I ask is because the last short that we put out, among like the five people who watch this podcast or whatever, there was one person who said, that man's forehead it was the site of the moon landing, right? And you should invest in a different camera angle.
No, that's so mean.
Oh no, I thought it was funny, and I just started thinking like, bro, I think that's just my forehead. Like I don't think it's the camera angle. I think that's
Oh
just
my
how it is.
Oh,
God.
that
I
means they'll
think
be
it's
commenting
fine.
on the top of my head this time. That'll be very embarrassing.
Oh yeah. No, Jeff, you just need to own it. Just like
Yeah,
do the podcast like this.
here we go.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think we could just jump right into the kind of the subject here. So I've done some research on what's in the bill, and I'm going to admit I don't like I haven't read the entire 940 pages or whatever the Senate version of the bill is right now. Right. I haven't gone through that whole thing. If anyone has, like, awesome, more power to you. But I think most people just don't have time for that. Um, but I have looked at a variety of articles, and different analyses, watched a number of videos, and I've tried to compile a list of the main things that keep coming up time and again, of sort of what this bill is actually doing, what are some of the main provisions here. So I'm going to take maybe just the first little bit of this podcast and just read through what I have, just because I think that'll be a useful exercise. And then let's get into some of these items. Let's see what you guys have heard and think about this, different perspectives that you've been acquainted with. The first thing here, and I think this is the core component of the bill, is the extending Trump's 2017 tax cuts. Right. So Trump made these tax cuts 2017. A lot of people argued, it disproportionately benefited the wealthy just in how it worked out in practice. And it ends up being a huge line item, right? This is sort of the main thing that would add to the deficit here, is just extending these cuts without sufficiently cutting spending. Um, and then there's large increases in ICE funding, the wall, boosting military spending, increases in state and local tax deduction caps, increased eligibility checks and able-bodied work requirements for Medicaid. There used to be a prohibition on using Medicaid funds for undocumented immigrants and gender transition surgeries. I believe the Senate parliamentarian axed that part. Cap and gradual reduction on taxes of Medicaid providers, with an associated fund for to offset harms to rural hospitals, extend able-bodied work requirements or the max age of them for SNAP, push some SNAP costs onto the state. Another really big one, raise the debt limit to about $4 to $5 trillion. Deductions for tips and overtime. And then Senate bill added restrictions for various high-income earners on that provision. There used to be a $1,000 asylum fee for people seeking asylum in the United States. The Senate version changed that a little bit. Now it's just at least a $100 fee. There was an AI moratorium. Um, so states, in order to receive certain funding, just couldn't really regulate AI for a period of about 10 years. And then increases in child tax credit. So that, and I assume a gazillion other things, is sort of what this bill is doing, what's actually in it. Um, oh, by the way, before we continue, is there like a buzzing sound for you guys?
Yes, I hear it.
Yeah. Does
Oh, well, it just disappeared.
that take care of it? I
Yeah.
muted myself for like a second and then it left.
Huh, that's
Yeah.
odd.
It's so weird. Is it
Well,
okay if I change where I'm sitting for a sec? I just like keep seeing my face like glow so much
oh,
from
oh,
like the
yeah, no, totally
window.
fine.
Okay, one second.
No, no, I think we overcorrected there. We told Maisie earlier, hey, it's too dark. Move to the other side of
Yeah.
the table, and now it's far too bright.
Yeah.
All
It's okay,
right.
we'll cut it in post.
No
Yeah,
big
yeah,
deal.
exactly. Or if we don't cut it in post, then, maybe it makes us seem a little more like real people. Um,
Actually, hold on. Maisie looks very fuzzy. Now she's coming into.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it just takes a while to adjust.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so that's me going over just the basic list of like the major items, major things this bill does that I can discern, right? Just looking at various articles, this is what people are talking about right now. Again, I'm sure there's a gazillion other things, and I know a fair bit of the bill was axed by the Senate parliamentarian because of the Byrd rule. Like with these reconciliation bills, um, you have to like only include things that directly, impact the budget essentially. And some of these other things weren't doing that. I'm sure there's like complex analyses that go into trying to determine what does and doesn't follow the Byrd rule there. And we can talk a little more about that because I think it's very much a strategy that the Republicans are employing to treat all of this as just a budget bill, right? Because it allows them to circumvent the filibuster and that sort of thing. It gives the Democrats less power here. So we can get into that a little bit, but first, I just want to hear from you guys. What else have you heard about this bill? Did what I say kind of capture it there? Are there other provisions you want to kind of mention or talk about, or even just general, vibes you're getting around this bill? Different things that you've heard to kind of, add some additional nuance to our discussion here.
Maisie, ladies before gentlemen.
Oh, okay. Um, so this is something that they've been working on for months. I mean, Trump's campaign basically ran on all of these topics that they're including in the bill here. So it is a pretty big deal. So it makes sense that people have really strong feelings about it. Um, but I think we're especially encouraged now to, you know, be extremely partisan in what bills we support and which ones we don't. People don't really do a lot of research when it comes to like bills and, acts in Congress that are labeled either Democrat or Republican. They just kind of trust their party, which I think is pretty dangerous. But in this case, after doing a lot of research, not like a ton of research, but just seeing what's in it, it seems like there are a lot of things that Democrats should be supporting and should be, things that are typically in their wheelhouse, like no tax on tips, all the childcare tax breaks. Um, I think there's a lot in there for agriculture as well. It's sort of surprising that I haven't seen anybody really support little pieces of it. It seems like it's a bill that both Republicans and Democrats should agree on at least a little. But yeah, it seems like Democrats don't really want to show support for it just because it's, Trump's sort of brainchild and that's how it's being marketed. But in reality, it's the work of like 11 different committees. I mean, it's gone through so many revisions. It's gone through a lot. And I mean, even now, they only just decided to debate on it last night. Um, so it's going through a lot of changes and it's going through a lot of review, definitely. And I think it's sort of like um it sort of is characteristic of the Republican Party to bring a huge bill to the table and then whittle it down. Whereas this is something that Joseph and I were talking about after the podcast last week. Democrats typically bring a cut down version of their bill to the table and want to vote on it, whereas Republicans bring like, you know, they kind of reach for the stars, I guess, and then cut it down. So it's, I feel like this bill is really misunderstood by a lot of different people, and people are being fed a lot of negative energy from the media, instead of doing their own research.
Hmm. Yeah. No, thank you for presenting that perspective, Maisie. I think that's really interesting because that does diverge greatly from sort of the media coverage on this bill. I think just to add maybe an alternative perspective there, I think what a number of Democrats would say, sort of in response to that, is that even if there are some things in this bill, or even quite a few things in this bill that should be completely bipartisan and that Democrats and Republicans should agree on, or even might seem a little more Democrat-esque than Republican, um, the way in which this bill has been orchestrated and the fact that it's a single bill that includes so much
Hmm.
sort of prevents that dialogue from occurring, right? Because it's not like you can then kind of separate it out and say, okay, well, let's make this a separate bill here. Let's vote on that. We all agree on it. Let's pass that part.
Hmm.
We all agree on this part. Let's pass that part as well. It's more just kind of, the Republicans have smashed everything together in a single bill. It's an all-in-one package. You agree to everything in here, or you don't agree, and you agree to the bill at all, right? And it's sort of just that framing has made it an all or nothing. And so,
Hmm.
I think that while I would love for, more nuanced and reasoned discussion on like, hey, we can agree on some aspects of this bill. Let's acknowledge good where it exists.
Hmm.
But then let's still debate these other things, right? I would love that. But I think that, just in fairness to the Democrats here, I think that that's almost just a political impossibility for them right now, right? Because it's
Sure.
sort of an all or nothing thing with this bill. And if you're going to fight against some of the major provisions that you strongly disagree with, because it's packaged into one bill, you just have to throw everything at the bill, right? This is the worst bill ever. Let's stop this. Everyone write to your senators, representatives, etc. You
Hmm.
overplay things. And it's sort of this arms race of hyperbole and rhetoric between both sides, overplaying the bill, or saying it's the best thing ever, or saying it's the worst thing ever, when really it's neither of those things. But you know,
Hmm.
it's it includes some major provisions that stoke a lot of controversy there. So I think that's probably what's running through the Democrats' mind right now, and I can understand that to a degree.
I agree. I mean, is there any way that they can, I mean, it's in deliberation right now. It's still being reviewed. I mean, can't they take an axe to some parts before passing it? Or I guess
So
walk me through the process.
they can take an axe to it, but the problem is, because it's a like a budget bill essentially, it's a reconciliation bill, right? It's just about
Hmm.
essentially the way the entire bill is packaged and all of these items are packaged is this is all about the budget,
Hmm.
right? So even if there's like a bunch of other things tagged onto that align with Trump's agenda, it's just meant to be a budget bill. And the thing about budget bills is instead of going through the normal process, they go through a much simpler process where, it basically bypasses the filibuster. It, just requires a simple majority in the Senate, not like a larger number of votes there. And so what's happening is it seems to me that this is just kind of bypassing the Democrats entirely. And the only thing they can do is really like force the entire bill to be read on the floor, like slow things down a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's just if the Republicans are united, it's going to get through.
Right.
Um, so I think that the only way in which something like that would happen, or something is axed, is if it's axed in sort of a by a third party, like it was the
Hmm.
Senate parliamentarian, who's just basically a rules keeper, saying, hey, this violates a rule and shouldn't be involved in a budget bill. This belongs in a different bill, so you can't include it here. So some things have been axed like that, but other things, it could only be axed if the Republicans want it axed. Essentially, is my understanding of the situation. I don't know, Jeff. Is that sort of your perception?
Yeah, I think it is. The Republicans have the votes if you assume that they all vote in unison. That's not necessarily a clear assumption at this point because some Republicans actually don't like this bill.
Hmm.
But they can pretty much do whatever they want. Now, from a voter's point of view, I personally prefer it when they stick with one issue at a time and have a full debate just on that issue, and then you vote on it up or down. I think when you mix everything together, it's really hard for people, including the congressmen themselves, to understand all the elements of the bill, and it becomes confusing and overwhelming. And before you know it, nobody really knows what's even in there. And
Hmm.
um, nobody's going to sit around and read a 940-page bill, or no normal citizen is anyway. I read the news summaries every day, and I have a
Hmm.
general sense for what's in there. And my sense is that the Republicans are getting a few things they really want. One is to protect the 2017 tax cuts that Trump put through at that time. They're getting more money being spent on the military. They always like that. More money for border patrol. That's, obviously a Republican position. And they're also cutting Medicaid, which is something they've wanted to do for a long time, by imposing these able-bodied work requirements. If you're healthy and can work, you should work before you receive any kind of dole from the government, including food stamps or SNAP. But there are always nuances to these things. For example, if you cut way back on SNAP, food stamps, it actually impacts farmers who tend to vote Republican because suddenly the government isn't buying as much food from the farmers to supply the food needs of the poor people who rely on food stamps. So I don't know. I'd rather cut this thing down into 10 different bills and really examine thoroughly the nuances of each component of the big bill.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah. No, I agree wholeheartedly with that, Jeff. And I hope that among the average conservative that there's sort of a I don't know, an understanding of the overall context in which this is occurring. The reason I say that is um, I remember it was a huge, and it's been for a while, a huge conservative talking point that, Democrats and progressives want to stuff tons of things into a single bill, and it'll be like 1,000-page bill or whatever, and it addresses all of these huge like social issues, and there's environmental issues in there. Just split it up. Let's talk about each one. Don't make these huge, burgeoning, complex bills. And now it's the exact reverse is occurring, right? And I hope that the average conservative or average Republican doesn't then say, oh well, I'm going to completely reverse my stance on what a bill should be because now it's Trump that's implementing it this way.
Well, you do have some of that, of course. There's so much
Hmm.
partisanship now.
Hmm.
People are put under a lot of pressure to support the party line. But I think what's happening here, and I think this is a strategy actually on the part of the Republicans, is they throw so much at you that you can't get your head wrapped around it, and it takes your eye off the ball, which is the deficit. Everybody who's looked at this thing agrees the deficit is going to increase by, 3.5 to 5 trillion dollars a year, starting in, over the next 10 years. It's not over each year. It's a 10-year period. Um, and nobody seems to care about it. It seems weird to me because this was always a Republican talking point that, we got to show more fiscal responsibility. We got to get the debt under control. We got to reduce the amount that's going towards paying interest on the debt. I don't know. It just seems like we're all living in fantasy land these days. And if we can all fight among each other on the minor components of the bill, then we're not looking at the big picture here. I think the debt is going to be a huge issue 10 years from now. And I feel sorry for you younger people because we oldsters will be gone or on our way out. And then you guys are going to be left holding the bag.
Yeah, no, I see that, Jeff. Though I will say, just in interest, because I was in response to Masie's comment, I kind of wanted to be a little fair to the Democrats, so I'm going to try to be kind of fair to the Republicans here. Um, I have seen some Republicans, make this precise note. And I think among those who changed their votes, who were originally against the bill for that exact reason, and then changed their votes, it seemed that they were saying, well, this is as good as it's going to get right now, and this is a start, and we need to revisit this, and go further later. So I think, at least they're acknowledging that, though, of course, you keep kicking this can down the road. It's not going to get easier to resolve in the future. So there's sort of that rebuttal there. And then I do know there are quite a few conservative thought leaders who are pretty outspoken against the bill as a result of the whole spending issue. I mean, Musk just recently, you know, stated once again, this is a horrible bill or whatever. I'm paraphrasing here, but for pretty much that reason, it continues to increase spending. It's not really good for industries of the future, as he put it, things like that. So I do see some Republicans making this exact point, even if like the majority of the party, or at least the majority of policymakers in the party, are just kind of glazing past that.
This idea of the industries of the future, I think it's a good point that Musk is making. He has an interest in this discussion because he runs Tesla and they build EVs. But it seemed like for a while there, the Americans, Tesla, were showing a leadership position when it comes to these kinds of cars and the batteries that power them and the infrastructure that Tesla has built across the entire country with electric charging stations. I don't know why you would want to punish this industry right now, just as it's in its infancy, taking off. I mean, China and other countries are racing to build EVs and to do it in a very powerful way at a very low cost. And so we're basically handing over leadership of this industry to the Chinese and others. And I guess Trump's response to that is, well, we'll just tariff the hell out of them and make it really expensive for their cars to come in. But I think electric vehicles and small nuclear power plants and a lot of these other things really are the future if we're going to try to wean ourselves from you know fossil fuels and carbon generating ways of doing things, which in my view it's an important thing. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, you can't deny that the world is getting hotter. I mean, every year the scientists say, this year the temperatures are up again, record breaking temperatures, and it's been going on for seemingly like decades now. So if it's not fossil fuels causing this, then what is it?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I mean, even just looking at some of the evidence there, I mean, it's pretty. I think it's really pretty hard to argue against anthropogenic climate change. Human caused climate change. This is kind of diverting into a different topic, but it's still relevant to the bill. Although I believe a good chunk of the environmental provisions in the bill were cut out by the Senate parliamentarian. I'm not sure exactly what the Senate version looks like on that now, but yeah, I mean, I took a descriptive astronomy class a little while ago, and we went over this. It's like the correlation's there. It's pretty freaking stark. And the explanation behind it is really just basic science. So I think that this is just another instance where I think there's useless and unnecessary partisanship. I think Republicans do have good points when we start getting into solutions. We have to be sober and responsible here. We can't destroy our economy. Whatever else, maybe a carbon tax isn't the best way to go and address this policy issue, that sort of thing. And I think that's where the debate should be focused. That's more productive, the actual solutions to the problem, as opposed to just whether climate change is a hoax or not, because I think it's it's pretty obviously not. I mean, from everything that I've seen, I don't feel that that's a partisan point to make. And I think I can't remember what the exact statistic was. It was like roughly 50% of Republicans and conservatives agree. That's a major splitting point in the party.
I mean, I think what's going on with this bill now, though, is that it's trying to offer immediate or like semi-immediate relief to the middle class as it is,
Mm.
instead of like, I think there are other things to be said about, moves for the future or EVs or, the environment. But I think the whole point now is just to provide economic relief. And I know that, cuts to the environmental sector are going to affect that, but I think there are other things that are more immediate. And I'm sure in the next, what, like 3 years, I'm sure it will be addressed. there's still a lot of time, and I I don't think I don't think the main focus of the bill is the environment, obviously, but I do agree with something you guys said going back though. Like it definitely encompasses a lot of different points, like the transgender medical cuts and Medicaid, and also the environment, and also tax on tips. And I know it's a budget bill, but it does encompass a lot of different sectors. Um, which was really like alarming because like you guys said, it only helps to be educated on these issues and able to have the time to pass these bills and become educated on them. And now the Democrats are, kind of making them all read the 940 pages, which is a lot. Like you were saying, Sam, like that's something that the Republicans before were like, that's, too much, and now, or the Democrats, and it is too much because, like, I don't know about you guys, if you had like a time limit on reading 940 pages, like how much of that would you actually retain? Like, how
Mm.
useful is this? Are they just filibustering or do they actually want people to learn about it?
I think that they probably wanted people to tune into some segments and maybe hear some major points. But I do
Yeah.
think that's a good point, Maisie, because I did a legislative internship and I went through a lot of bills and kind of reading the summaries, trying to determine what the bill's actually doing. It's it's a headache. Like it's just these are the
Okay,
worst
that's
written
okay.
things ever. Like it's not enjoyable
Mhm.
reading. It's very technical. It's like amendment to I don't know subsection A B C 1-3. Strike
Mhm.
lines. I through 3 the triple I there. Sort of Roman numerals. It's not something that's enjoyable. It's not something that you can easily grasp, and just kind of a light cursory reading. So I don't think that's really the intention. I think that it's probably just maybe we get some major points out there, and maybe it's the principle of it. If you're reading it, at least the American people have more of a chance to listen in there. And maybe the main motivation is it's just slowing it down. Um, I don't know.
Yeah, it just seems like a waste of time and money to me
Yeah.
because the committees have already like read it and waited on it, and it's been in the process for months. So it's just a stalling talk tactic, I think. I don't think
Yeah.
they actually believe people will pull anything out of it.
Yeah, it could very well be, and I think that could be a valid criticism of what the Democrats are doing right now.
It's just another like, I don't know, immature move, I think. I'm kind of sick of hearing like the name calling and the immature cafeteria
Yeah,
behavior and
it's like even if you like absolutely hate the bill, maybe it just spend your time a little more wisely, right? Like, okay, well, this isn't going to prevent it from being passing, so let's just pass it and let's get to work trying to, you know, resolve other issues, or maybe, if you're a Democrat who really doesn't like the bill, lessen its impact in other areas, or even just try to mobilize your base for the midterm elections more, or something like that.
yeah.
You know, each party has its spending priorities. Republicans like the military, they like tax cuts, they like border patrols.
Jeff,
Democrats,
could you speak up just a little bit?
yeah, and
Mhm.
Democrats like social welfare programs. So everybody has an incentive to spend more because it makes people happy if the benefits continue to flow. For example, I'm older and I would really hate to see Social Security cut. So I have a stake in this too. So everybody always has a good reason to spend more money, but nobody ever wants to increase taxes to pay for it or to tighten up tax loopholes or to even hire the number of people that the IRS needs to, you know, do the audits and find the tax cheat. So I think we need to do something about taxes in coming years, and I don't see how we can avoid a tax increase. And I think it's going to have to hit the rich more than the poor at this point. I read this morning prior to the session that um, the, the, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that the wealthier Americans are going to get $12,000 a year in additional benefits to the benefits that they got in 2017 when the initial tax cuts went through. And the average poor person is going to see $1,600 in pain which will be a combination of either increased taxes or reduced benefits. So I don't know. It seems like we've gone to an awful lot of effort and work to not achieve very much. And the thing that's especially not being achieved or addressed is the deficit itself. So I don't know how we get around tax increases. I think they should be spending a lot of time studying each and every one. What can we do here to increase taxes? Now, the Republicans have always traditionally argued, well, if we cut taxes, it will unleash all of this creativity and economic activity, and the growth will make up for it, and before you know it, the economy will be booming, and then tax revenues will go up once that occurs. We just don't see it in the real world very often. I mean, that goes back to Ronald Reagan, and we suffered quite a recession there for a while. I'm not saying it was a bad thing at the time because we had a lot of inflation that needed to be squeezed out of the system, but I don't know. It just seems like we can't keep kicking this can down the road forever, as you put it, Sam.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think also with I want to look more into, because I don't know much about this, but I want to look more into the whole tax situation. Because if you just look at the tax cuts as specified in the bill, obviously the rich still pay a lot more in taxes, that sort of thing, right? It's like 30 something, 40%, depending on exactly, what tax we're talking about or what combination, et cetera. And, the poor, I can't remember exactly what income brackets this applies to, but it was around like 10 to 15% or something like that. Um, so if you just look at that, it seems like, okay, well, we're taxing the rich more. We're doing exactly that. But I know that when you get more into the economic analysis and you add on all the additional fees, you add on like, the spending power of each group, what's necessary for kind of living, et cetera. The proportion of income that's taken up by, additional expenses, things like that. It ends up, impacting the lower income brackets a lot more than the higher income brackets. So I know that's where it comes into play, but I don't know all the mechanics behind that. I'm no expert economist, so I'd love to kind of learn more about that.
Let me say this. Warren Buffett is a billionaire, and he always makes the case that the rich should pay more taxes. He said, in terms of tax rates, his secretary pays a higher tax rate than he does.
Hmm.
Now, I think that's pretty ridiculous. And let's face it, rich people are smart and they hire lawyers and accountants and people
Yep.
who can find every deduction possible and push it to the
Hmm.
max. I think there, at a minimum, there ought to be a minimum tax on people with a certain threshold of either income or wealth or both, so that they pay their fair share. A lot of people don't pay taxes, or they pay very little in the way of taxes, and it just doesn't seem
Hmm.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think this is precisely the thing that's feeding into the narrative that's very prominent on the left and that's pushed a lot. We've talked about this in the past, but it's pushed a lot by Bernie Sanders especially, and that's the oligarchy. That really what's going on here with this bill and other policies implemented by the Republicans is it's just billionaires enriching themselves while slashing services for lower income groups. Now I think the biggest point, let's talk maybe about like slashing the services to lower income groups, because I think, yes, the tax cuts, they probably affect the rich disproportionately. But as far as services for lower income groups, the main thing that I'm finding here, which I think there can be some valid debate on, because I wonder if the Republicans are making some valid points on this exact subject. And it's kind of the Medicaid coverage and so forth. It seems like most of what this bill is doing is putting additional restrictions on Medicaid, work requirements, and so forth. Like, hey, if you're going to be on Medicaid and if you're able-bodied, you need to be working, this much, with exceptions, for people who have disabilities and children under 14, et cetera. Um, and I don't know, just looking at that, like I see a lot of analyses on, okay, well, this combined with a few other restrictions, a few things that are being done to the Affordable Care Act, things like that, they're going to prevent 16 million people from, having a health insurance, within X, Y, Z years. Um, and that's the statistic being thrown around a lot. But I'm just wondering if a majority of that is coming from these restrictions, which to me, just on the surface, seem like they're pretty valid restrictions to impose on a government service like this, I mean, is that really an instance of, just indifferently destroying the lives of lower income groups in order to pay for tax cuts that benefit the rich? Or is it, no, we're putting in tax cuts, for every group, they just in practice disproportionately affect the rich. And we're imposing these kind of commonsensical restrictions on Medicaid and other forms of coverage. I think there's two very different narratives here. And while I'm not going to go so far as to say this is like the greatest bill ever, like Trump touts and Republicans do, I do wonder if on some of these points the Democrats are also, very much overplaying things, and these restrictions on Medicaid and so forth seem somewhat commonsensical. I don't know. Am I missing something here? Am I not diving deep enough into this? What are your guys' thoughts?
I mean, I absolutely think that the cuts to Medicaid are just there to increase accountability. I mean, if it's going to take 16 million people off of Medicaid, which for one, they just got that number based on the amount of people um who don't comply with these regulations. As a regular person, it is really hard for the middle class to get health insurance. It is. And it's just, without these cuts and without, prioritizing spending and prioritizing the budget, it just makes it even harder. So if there are people who are abusing it and who are, not undeserving of it, I don't want to use that word, but if they are abusing it, I do think that they need to be regulated a little more. I mean, I think currently you just have to report your income and kind of fill out some forms and everything. And I think you also have to submit some tax forms. I think, guys, correct me on this if I'm
I'm
wrong.
not sure what the process looks like, but I all I know is currently Medicaid doesn't
Mhm.
include work requirements, except in some cases on the state level. I know, I think like Arkansas, and
Right,
I think Georgia as well. They require they have certain work requirements, but it's not federal, right? It's just if you're in that state, you also have this additional stuff.
right.
This bill would make some of those restrictions federal.
I mean,
I
all
just,
this is just to say, oh,
I just,
sorry.
I just want to make sure I understand what's going on here. So the 16 million people who are going to lose their Medicaid, is it Medicaid or Medicare in this case?
Medicaid.
Medicaid.
Medicaid. Okay. Are the Republicans saying that all of these people are people who are able-bodied and should be working and therefore shouldn't be receiving these benefits? That's a big number.
Mhm.
I
I
think a
think
couple
that's
million are undocumented immigrants, and then the
mhm.
remaining are people who don't comply with these regulations.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what it is. I'm not sure exactly. I haven't dived into how this statistic came about. I know it was promulgated by a some sort of research institution that focuses specifically on health issues. I'd want to do more research into that. That's unfortunately all I know at this time. But yeah, I think what Republicans would say is, yeah, these are people who are, kind of abusing the system and or are undocumented immigrants. Though I'm not sure if that number's been modified at all, because I thought that the Senate parliamentarians struck the restriction on like preventing undocumented immigrants from using Medicaid and preventing Medicaid from being used for gender transition surgeries. Those were both things in the original bill. I think this parliamentarian said that's not dealing directly with the budget. Cut it out. So I'm not sure where it stands exactly right now, but yeah, I do think that's what Republicans would say. I think what some Democrats would say is at least for some of these people, it's going to be like issues related to federal bureaucracy and so forth, right? Like some people fall through the cracks who shouldn't, and so really, maybe it's sort of a dichotomy between the Republicans and Democrats of Republicans focused more on preventing people from abusing the system, and Democrats focused more on preventing people from falling through the cracks, right? Even if you do meet the requirements, maybe you still can't get on because we all know how federal bureaucracy is. So I think that that's kind of the dichotomy here. Democrats are more willing to allow people to abuse the system in order to prevent people who need the coverage from, falling through and not getting what they need. Republicans are the reverse. Um, I also know this has been brought up by in one article I read that was left leaning, it said that when Arkansas implemented this restriction, they actually didn't see any increases in employment. They only saw decreases in health insurance coverage. So I think some Democrats are saying this isn't actually going to lead people to be employed, more fully. It's just going to prevent people from getting coverage. I don't know if that's true. I don't know how valid that study is, but that's just one thing that I read. So I think that's the overall situation. Those are the perspectives as I see them.
Let's talk about that for a minute. So let's say the Arkansas situation is accurate the way you depicted it. So if people lost their Medicaid benefits, but they didn't go out and join the workforce, who are these people and what are they doing? I mean, are they just staying at home, living in their parents' basement and they just don't want to work? I mean, I think this is an issue that is a fairness issue. And I think most Americans would agree that, everybody who's able bodied should work.
Mm,
And it's not clear to me why somebody who is able-bodied and doesn't work should receive added benefits from the taxpayers. I think that just rubs people the wrong way, and it causes a
mhm.
backlash. So I understand where the Republicans are coming from on this one. If
Oh yeah.
that really is uh, the justification for 16 million people getting lopped off, I mean, I'm pretty shocked. It seems like a really high number. We have a low unemployment rate right now. It seems like jobs are going begging. So there's work out there for the people who want it.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I agree, Jeff. And I think maybe just an interest in fairness to the other side, maybe there's a more nuanced approach here where, well, yes, maybe there's a good number of people who are abusing the system, but maybe within that statistic, there's people who, they can't work for whatever reason, and for, additional X, Y, and Z reason, they fall through the cracks, and their disability isn't covered by something, or we need to expand the number of disabilities covered, and there's a debate there. So maybe there's a more nuanced approach, but on the surface, and without knowing much about that, I kind of completely agree with where you're coming from, Jeff. Oh, Maisie, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, it was doing like the hissing noise, so I got rid of it. Um, I was just gonna say, I think on the topic of Medicaid, like if they are disabled and can't work, and I feel like there definitely should be things in place for that. Like it's probably gonna fall under disability and workers' comp and things like that, like
Mhm.
other places where they need to petition or, prove their ineligibility to work. Um, and that's something that they've had to do anyway, because if
Yep.
you're receiving disability, you have to prove that you can't work anyway. So I,
Mhm.
sorry, I'm like losing focus, but it's okay with the
Oh no,
camera.
yeah,
You know,
totally
this
fine.
is actually this is a real issue in Los Angeles. We have a big homelessness problem here, and a lot of these people are living in tents on the streets, and it's just obvious from walking by and looking at them that a lot of them have serious mental health conditions.
Hmm.
And you know, they're not going to work. They're not capable of working. Maybe they could be if they were if they went through rehab. A lot of these people are on drugs. A lot of these people are alcoholics. But right now, it just appears that they really don't want to work. They just want to sit in their tents on the streets or on the beaches and be left alone. But it angers people because they don't like this situation. And yet, when you look beneath the surface a little bit, uh, most of them receive a check for like $1,100 a month from some branch of Social Security. It's called SSI or something like that. If you can prove that you're mentally disabled and not qualified to work, well, you get a check. Well, that's okay. It sounds like a very humanitarian thing to do. But a lot of these people take their money and they spend it on drugs or alcohol, and they don't work, and it just seems like it's a broken system, and we got to wean people off the drugs and the alcohol and give them menial tasks to do until they can stand on their own 2 feet a little bit better. Move them into tiny homes or other inexpensive shelters, and then keep moving them up the ladder as they get rehabilitated. But right now, they're just left there to rot. It's not a very humanitarian outcome at all, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of valid points there. Um, and I just wish I knew more about kind of the nuances of this policy issue, because I'm sure there's plenty of reason for the extensive debate, but yeah, I think in this part of the bill, I think Republicans have a pretty strong point there. That's just what it looks like to me on the surface. Other parts, I can see where the Democrats are coming from. We already talked about the tax breaks, disproportionate effects there, and tax cuts without really decreasing spending, those issues. So I think where I'm at is this isn't the best bill to have ever crossed, our modern history. This isn't the worst bill ever that's going to utterly destroy, lower income groups, and it's just oligarchy. Um, I think that this is a flawed bill with some good points and some pretty bad ones. That's just kicking, major cans down the road and not solving relevant issues. And I also think that it's too much packed in a single bill. So I can see both sides that of points that are made on this bill. Um, but I think that both sides also, just because of how the bill's set up, how the system works, and our media environment, both sides are incentivized to play this situation up as much as possible, and treat this as the best or worst thing ever. And I think that's then the perception that is inherited by the American people, and it's very unfortunate.
Damn, I think you just stated it so well that we got to just stop right here, seriously, because I don't think we can add to that.
Oh no, no, I don't know about that, but yeah, I just we are running out of time here, so I just want to thank both of you guys for sharing your perspectives, for joining me today, and just kind of comparing notes. All of us trying to figure out what's going on here. I feel like we've made some ground, and if when this podcast is published, the bill's passed or it's not, or whatever else, I feel like irrespective of sort of what happens there, I've at least gained some value out of this.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, guys.
This podcast was brought to you by Our National Conversation, a place where students generate policy solutions to the biggest problems facing America. Join us in freeing political dialogue from hyperpartisanship. To learn more about what you heard today, check us out at ournationalconversation.org. You can also follow us on social media at Our National Conversation to show your support and keep up with our latest efforts.